What is up, Canada? What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here. I thought rather than panicking about maybe a third wave, let's find something else. Maybe there's something else we can panic about. So let's talk about, are we entering a mortgage crisis? So this is something that pretty much, it's been a year now that the mainstream media has been talking to us about mortgage deferrals, the average Canadian struggling to make their mortgage payments, mortgage delinquencies, what's going on with all that space. And, I don't know what got into me, but recently, I guess I actually saw on Netflix, it like repopped up The Big Short and was pushing The Big Short on me again. I was like, I haven't seen anyone really pushing that like gloom and doom about Canadian mortgages since the start of the year. So I wonder what happened to that entire narrative. So I thought, let's see if we can find some data and maybe just shine a little light on what's going on when it comes to Canadian mortgages. So are Canadian mortgages about to have record default rates? Are we about to see Canadians struggling to pay their mortgages unlike ever before? And I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments section, anecdotally speaking. What have you seen personally as well as from friends and family? Are they deferring their mortgages? If they had the option to defer, did they just automatically say yes? Or were they really scared to defer and only deferred if they absolutely had to defer that mortgage? I'd love to hear your thoughts and your opinions, and anecdotally speaking, what you guys have seen. But let's jump into some data, and then I'd love to share my thoughts and my opinions on what I think is going on here, because I actually think there's a little bit more to the story than what you might have just picked up on in a few of those headlines. So let me know your thoughts and your opinions, and I'll share some of mine. So the first one I want to focus on here was, let's just get a little bit of data. So this data here is from Statista and, delinquency rates of lenders in Canada in 2019 and second quarter 2020 by type. So I thought this would just be a good refresher, because again, turns out not all lenders are created equal. And it turns out a lot of lenders focus on risk aversion, where a small subsegment are going to focus on riskier lending, right? So when we're looking at what's actually going on in the lender space, we can see that mortgage investment corporations and private lenders, hey, those are the guys that we use a lot of the time, they take on riskier mortgages, it appears, and they have a much higher delinquency rate than what you'd see from any of the other normal lending institutions in Canada in this space. So looking at what we see here, we can see that in Q2 2020, those mix in private lenders were bumping up against a 2% delinquency rate. And certainly that's an increase from the 1.73 we had back in 2019, but doesn't immediately sound like the end of the world. And when we look at mortgage finance companies, MFCs, banks, and credit unions, and their Quebec equivalents, again, we can see that they're all very low delinquency rates. And while we had a slight increase in the MFCs and the banks, it's just hard for me to see MFC and not just think like motherfucking CEO or motherfucking corporation. But let me know what you guys think when you see the MFC acronym. But again, none of this looked too drastic, but hey, it was pretty early in the pandemic. So obviously it's going to be hard for us to know if it's the end of the world just a month or two into, or a quarter or two into the 2020 pandemic. So the first one I want to touch upon here is this article from the Financial Post. So post haste, don't be alarmed, but as much as 20% of Canadian mortgages are at a higher risk of defaulting. So the first thing I really want to just kind of explore here is, I think a lot of people would take this at face value, right? And be like, oh my God, 20% of Canadian mortgages are at a higher risk of defaulting. But what does that actually mean? And for me, when I started digging into this, I feel like maybe some wires got crossed here, because it doesn't feel like they were actually saying 20% of mortgages are at a higher risk. Or if they are, I don't think that it's saying exactly what their headline said. But you guys tell me. So let's actually look into the article. So diving into it, we believe 10 to 20% of mortgages under deferral are at a higher risk of defaulting. We are most concerned about borrowers on a deferral program who are unemployed, makes sense, and we're receiving the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB. Hey, don't worry, we came out with a new one. We dropped the E, so it'll last a long time. And borrowers on a deferral program who are employed but are earning less than what they earned pre-COVID. So right off the bat, we're talking about 10 to 20% of mortgages under deferral, not necessarily just 20% of mortgages. So I don't necessarily know if I agree with the conclusion that title has. And then if we take this further, let's look at actually what's going on. Well, we were also concerned about borrowers not on a deferral program, but are facing some form of financial hardship. If 20% of mortgages under deferral eventually become delinquent in Canada, this equates to a mortgage delinquency rate of 2.3%. So the reason this is because currently 11% of mortgage borrowers from Canadian banks, the large banks, are not making payments. So they've essentially opted into some sort of deferral program, some sort of delinquency, according to RBC. So really what we're looking at here is, had you read that headline, I think it would have been reasonable for someone to probably jump to the conclusion of, holy shit, 20% of Canadian mortgages are at higher risk of defaulting. Or I wouldn't even blame you if you almost thought that 20% of Canadian mortgages are at risk of defaulting. Not higher risk, but at risk. As in, like, there's a risk that this is actually going to happen. Whereas when we dive a bit deeper into it, we realize that, okay, well, if 20% of mortgages under deferral of that 11%, then essentially 2.3% we could expect as our delinquency rate, which is 4 times higher than the peak mortgage delinquency rate over the past 30 years. So that would be a big deal. However, when we take a step back and look at it, a 2.3% delinquency rate isn't necessarily going to be gloom and doom. It's not necessarily the U.S. mortgage crisis that we saw, just under, actually, it's over a decade now. Where has the time gone? But anyways, just want to touch upon that because I think we all know that the media both wants us to believe, like, this is the strange part about mainstream media. And you guys let me know, which one do you see more often these days? Is it, I'll never be able to afford a house? Or is it about the real estate market crashing and we're all going to become poor and all our mortgages are going to crumble? Because it feels hard to believe it's both, right? It feels hard that I'm never going to be able to buy a house and mortgages are going to crumble and prices are going to crumble. It feels like probably it's going to be one or the other. And yet it seems like every other day you see a competing headline in a Canadian mainstream media source really pushing one or sometimes even both of those narratives. But let's jump over to Better Dwelling. So this was another one of those articles that came out at the start of the year, really just talking about, Canadian mortgages over 120 days past due rises at the fastest pace in years. So again, just kind of touching upon it. Yeah, these are unusual times. We expect to see some unusual deviancies from normal. But at the same time, I don't know if this is like jump off the cliff, jump off the building sort of panics. So we've got links to all the stories we're going to talk about here. So I'm not going to read through each and every one of them for you guys, but do encourage you guys to spend some time and do that. But let's look at, I believe this is going to be one of the, so mortgage delinquency rates in Toronto and Vancouver reached 4-year high. So I thought it was also worthwhile just pointing out that, again, real estate, location, location, location. That's one of the oldest adages you're going to hear when it comes to real estate investing. And as a byproduct of that, it's very contextual, right? So we can't treat real estate as if it's just one broad asset or one broad commodity. It actually is very regional or very location specific. So one thing to be aware of, Toronto and Vancouver are reaching 4-year highs. But again, in the big scheme of things, this is presumably a once in a lifetime or a once in a millennia sort of pandemic. So to see us reach 4-year highs, again, doesn't sound like the actual end of the world. Now, this doesn't mean that long term there couldn't be significant consequences to real estate with what's going on with COVID. In fact, it kind of seemed naive to think that there wouldn't be long-term consequences. But what I'm saying is, I hate jumping to conclusions here based upon a couple of newspaper headlines. So I figured, hey, let's see if we've got any recent data. And wouldn't you know it that thankfully CMHC read my mind and March 7th published new data out on mortgage delinquencies across Canada. So you guys can download it. Again, link in the video description down below to get your download. Really encourage you guys to do that. Dive into the data yourself. But if you do download it, essentially what you're going to get is one of these tables. Ooh, that's probably really detailed. But trust me, there's a bunch of Canadian cities and default rates. So for example, let's zoom in a little bit here. So for example, if we were to look at, 2012 Q3, which is when this chart starts, we can see what the delinquency rates were going on across Canada looked like. And we've got some notes down here too, in case you guys are curious. So, we're looking at the share of loans that are past due 90 days or more in regards to what is considered to be a delinquency rate. But we can see that overall Canada back in 2012 was 0.38 across the board. And if we jump over here now, we can see that we are 0.25 in 2020 Q4. So again, we can see that there doesn't appear to be massive changes on the surface here. Now, again, one thing that I didn't find a lot of information about is how things like the deferral programs may be quantified here. So yeah, I don't think that they had notes here, and I didn't see notes back on the main page. So that is something that would be wise for someone to really dig into to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. But on the surface, seems like things are pretty even keel overall. And again, that doesn't mean that individual markets aren't. We can see Newfoundland here, 0.24, and it's literally doubled now at 0.51, and earlier it was actually higher. So again, some of these new deferral programs could actually be causing this drop off, and you'll see on the next page here what I'm talking about. Let me get my mouse up. So I decided let's make a nice little handy chart of all this, or a little graph, and you guys can now see by province. So what I'm talking about here is we can see a consistent drop off in the delinquency rate across the board in Q4. And I'm guessing that that has to do with some sort of deferral program that either came into play or was available to individuals, or maybe the way banks report this information to CMHC, because it just seems a little too good to be true that all the rates would drop across the board. But at the same time, be aware of that, right? And when we're looking specifically, you can see Ontario by far has the lowest delinquency rates, followed by, is it British Columbia's next? But again, there's a huge discrepancy here between like a Newfoundland and in Ontario. So again, when we're talking about mortgage delinquencies, we shouldn't be treating it as just some sort of broad basket. And one of the great things here is we can actually dive into specific cities. So this is definitely not going to show up well, probably on the screen share, guys. But a reminder, you can literally go download this information. I created these charts in like under 10 minutes on Google Sheets, so there's no reason why you can't either. And you're not going to be able to see this, but just as an FYI, in case you're curious, because I know I was, it's actually Guelph and Kitchener-Waterloo have the two absolute lowest rates of delinquency right now in Canada. So, there it popped up for me for a second. So we can see Guelph is at 0.07%, and just above it is, where are you? Kitchener-Waterloo at 0.06, or I guess I got that backwards. 0.05 in this moment, 0.06. So again, we can see extremely low delinquency rates. Now, there's actually a shit ton you guys can do with this information, and maybe I'll circle back to this in a moment. But what do you guys think when you look at this data? Does it make you want to panic and think that all mortgages are going to go into delinquency overnight? I really don't. Am I concerned that as much as 20% of Canadian mortgages are at a higher risk of defaulting? It's something to be aware of, but once we get a little bit more informed, it seems like really 2.3% are actually truly at risk of becoming delinquent, right? Of actually failing to make their payments. So I'm not panicking when I see numbers like this, and I don't think that you guys should be either. And again, it's important to understand what's going on in the specifics or the details here so we can get dialed in to understanding where the trends are going. And we can understand that it's not going to be the same in every city, right? Toronto and Vancouver, we're seeing a lot higher. But again, what does that mean, a 4-year increase compared to where they once were? Well, if we jump back to this chart again, let's chase down Toronto here. So where are we? Toronto. Well, we can see, like, according to the CMHC graph right now, we've got 0.1 versus 0.24 back then. Right now doesn't sound like a severe panic, and it really doesn't seem like a huge change quarter over quarter from really any of these things. So again, that doesn't mean that things can't change in the future. So I'm not saying that you can now watch this one video of Matt's and you can rest assured and never worry again about whether there's a chance of mortgage delinquencies or mortgage defaults. And the last piece I wanted to do before I stop my screen share here, let me zoom in a bit. So this is from the actual Canadian Bankers Association looking at number of mortgages in arrears. So this is going to be a little bit different than delinquency, right? And again, it's important that we understand exactly what they're talking about. But when we're looking at total number of mortgages, we can see that we've got 4.9 million across Canada. Number of mortgages in arrears, 11,000. So that essentially works out to that 0.23. So again, comparing back to what CMHC had here at 0.25, sounds about right? Sounds like we're in the right ballpark. So again, it's nice just to be able to kind of cross-check some of these things. And again, seems pretty reasonable on the surface in this moment. Doesn't mean that things can't change. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't stay on top of this information the same way that we talk about the CREA stats almost every single day now on this YouTube channel. We're talking about them. But again, right now, when the markets seem extra volatile, when it seems like we're in an everything bubble, when it seems like crazy inflation could be on the horizon, or we could see a real estate crash if things play out a different version, it's important you guys to stay dialed into the data because there's more than enough drama for you to panic in whatever direction you want. So if you want to panic about the third wave of COVID, I'm sure there's more than enough for you to panic about on that subject matter. Just turn to your friends at the mainstream media. But if you want to panic about mortgage delinquencies, I got to kind of take a beat here and really look at the data. Yeah, interest rates are creeping up. Will that put more pressure on affordability? Presumably so. Could we continue to see Canadians drifting towards delinquency? Absolutely. Do I think, though, that there's going to be one individual event that currently is on the horizon, not some new black swan, because there's always another black swan, I'm sure, out there. But do I currently think that there's anything that could really be that catalyst? I don't see any one individual thing that could be the catalyst that could really push us into that scary territory of all of a sudden just having Canadians everywhere trying to mail in their keys like we saw in the US. But that's just my opinion. Those are just my thoughts. Love to get your thoughts and your opinions and really just hear what's your perspective when it comes to the Canadian real estate market. Are you guys still buying? Are you sitting on the sidelines? Are you worried about mortgage delinquencies? Are you a private lender? I also know a handful of private lenders that regularly watch this. And, we've had a Mick on here before. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? Are you guys being more restrictive when it comes to lending out your private money? Because as we saw, Mix, the mortgage investment corporations, as well as private lenders are at the greatest risk of actually having that delinquency. So again, they're literally 10 times at a greater risk, but presumably they're compensated for the risk they take on, right? Every one of us chooses to get into this business. None of us are forced to get into it. So anyways, love to hear your thoughts and your opinion, but I don't think you should be panicking when it comes to any potential mortgage crisis. I do think you should be paying attention to the data. We should definitely notice whether interest rates are trending up. But the other thing I'll say to that is, I don't know. You guys let me know in the comments, but when I look at the Bank of Canada, I see a bunch of doves dressed up as hawks. I don't actually see hawks there. So maybe you guys actually see hawks that are going to keep inflation in check, but I actually just see a bunch of doves that are hoping if they talk tough and maybe they nudge the interest rate every now and then, that we'll all just pretend inflation doesn't exist. Meanwhile, we're in the everything bubble. So I don't know. Love to get your thoughts and your opinions, but I appreciate you guys hanging out with me on another Monday live stream. And a reminder, every Monday we go live at 9:20 p.m. where I'll just kind of hang out with you guys and smoke weed. We no longer do it in the bathroom. We now just do it in just my room. But looking forward to hanging out with you guys at 9:20. Come with any of your real estate questions, any personal finance questions, financial independence, any of those random things that you want to ask me, feel free to jump in there. And a reminder, if you guys haven't checked out Cashflow Tribe, Cashflow Tribe is my real estate education company, and I'll actually be going live on a Zoom call in Cashflow Tribe at 7:30. So if you guys are members, make sure you check out my Monday 7:30 live class where you can literally come on Zoom. I can see your face. You can do screen shares. I can do screen shares. And literally, I do live deal analysis, anything that you guys want. It's essentially an ask me anything about real estate investing. So if you're interested in that, Peter, the producer's got the link scrolling across the bottom for you guys so you can check it out. But otherwise, I'll be live at 9:20 smoking weed. I'll see you guys then. Appreciate it. See you in the